Good afternoon.
Sorry, go ahead, Knut.
Good afternoon. This is my time to introduce Yesenia. She's so eager, she can't wait to get going. There are problems, and then there are problems, Yesenia. Good afternoon. I'm Knut Rostad, president of the Institute for the Fiduciary Standard. We meet today for one of our fourth of 7 panel discussions in Fiduciary September. I hope you all enjoying your Fiduciary September and appropriately acknowledging it and celebrating it. So this is the fourth of the 7 presentations we will have. I will let Yesenia introduce the speakers in the session, and I get to introduce Yesenia. We'll leave it to the highlights that I am aware of. Yesenia is, of course, with Tobias Financial Advisors in Plantation, Florida. And Tobias has been a very active member of the Institute for the Fiduciary Standard over several years now. And part of that activity comes from Yesenia. She is on the Institute's Next Gen Leadership Forum, where this effort actually came from in terms of this program. And Yesenia has also produced a short video, which is on our website, about why it's important that rollovers be subject to fiduciary duty. But in addition to what Yesenia has done with and for the Institute, she has a very active professional life. She has been with Tobias for several years. She is a certified financial planner, and she has been active both with NAPFA and FPA in her time as a financial planner. I am going to sort of leave it at that and not do full justice to Yesenia, but I'll let her speak for herself and let the show move on. So Yesenia, you have the microphone.
Excellent. Well, Knut, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I want to thank everyone for joining us today to learn more about fiduciary advisors and the different ways in which they collaborate with different tax advisors, estate attorneys, and insurance agents to create a truly holistic plan that incorporates all areas of their financial lives. As we strive to bring more value to the table, it's imperative that we acknowledge our own blind spots, and more importantly, that we know when to consult and rely on other subject matter experts. In the past, this may have looked like a handoff referral, but it's become really evident through our individual experiences that true collaboration between professionals is what yields the best outcomes for our clients. And so we're looking to create a framework really for the next generation of professionals and demonstrate how truly beneficial it is for us all to work together, even though we come from different practice areas. So today we are very thankful to have an expert panel of professionals weighing in on collaboration as we enter this era of new planning for clients' financial lives. So with that, I'd love to introduce our panelists. First, we have Kaylee Barbera. She is a partner at the law firm of Snyder & Snyder, PA in Davie, Florida, where she concentrates on tax and estate planning with an emphasis on art succession, planning focusing on how to transfer art, artifacts, and collectibles in a tax-efficient manner, estate and trust administration, and special needs planning. She's a member of both the Florida and New York Bar. She's a professor at the University of Miami Law School, a graduate program in estate planning for attorneys seeking an LLM degree.
This is the correct number.
If everyone could please put their microphone on mute. Thank you. Some fun facts about Kaylee. She has tried out for American Idol and is an avid Disney fan with over 15 mouse ears in her closet. So Kaylee, super excited to have you here on the panel. Next, we have Joe Bartella, who is a native of Buffalo, New York, with a degree in accounting from the University of Buffalo. He was a CPA at a regional accounting firm for 5 years and has moved into a tax and wealth planning role at Sanderson Wealth Management, where he has been for the last few years. He primarily focuses on tax consulting and family CFO engagements. Some fun facts about Joe is that he's been a Buffalo Bills season holder for 7 years, and before becoming a CPA, he was a tennis coach in Buffalo. So Joe, thank you so much for being with us today. Third, we have Mark Maurer, who is president and CEO of LLIS in Tampa, Florida. As the son of insurance experts Keith and Judith Maurer, Mark grew up in the insurance industry and has an impressive education and mentoring combination. He joined LLIS in 2003, earned his CFP designation in 2006, and assumed the reins of LLIS in 2012. Under his leadership and dedication, LLIS expands its portfolio of solutions and services that it has provided to fee-only advisors and clients since 1998. A fun fact about Mark, he married his college sweetheart and they just celebrated their 25th anniversary in July. Thank you, Mark, for being with us today. And last but not least, we have Franco Gay. He is a fee-only wealth advisor at Tobias Financial Advisors, where he uses his expertise in financial planning and taxation to help a diverse range of clients, including business owners, executives, and real estate professionals. He is a certified financial planner and enrolled agent with the IRS. With a passion for tailoring financial strategies to meet unique client needs, Franco is dedicated to helping them achieve long-term success. He is also actively involved in professional organizations, serving as the chair of NAPFA's South Region Board of Directors and chair of the South Florida Student Chapter for the American Society of Quality. As a fun fact, Franco used to be a cowboy. Franco, thank you for joining us. For everyone joining us, please enter any questions you may have in the chat box. I'll be checking them periodically and asking them to the panelists throughout the presentation. But otherwise, we will leave some time at the end for some questions. So with that, let's get started. I'm going to pick on Franco first. So when you think about client success and working with other professionals, what does this look like? What is it throughout the process, or what is the thought process on how to determine when it's appropriate to bring in another professional?
Yeah, so it's a really great question. I always think of being a collaborative professional as working with other experts to create an end solution for a client that is much better than what any one of us could have come up with on our own. So taking from the expertise of the law field, taking from the expertise of the insurance field, tax, everything, and wrapping it into one really great recommendation for the client to follow and to help them implement. And so, you know, thinking about the second part of the question, when is it appropriate to bring in a outside professional? I think that kind of naturally unravels as you get to know the client's goals, right? So going through the client engagement, understanding what they want to achieve, figuring out what they've currently put into place to be able to achieve what they want, and then finding those gaps and saying, hey, Mark could help with this on the insurance side, or Kaylee could help with this on the estate planning side, or Joe could help with this on the tax side. Could we bring them in? Would you be okay with that? Because I think I know the answer here, but I always want to defer to the experts, and they know a lot more and could help us navigate some of the pitfalls in those solutions.
Thank you, Franco. I think those are really good points. And I think as the CFP, it's a unique position because you're really quarterbacking some of the other professionals. So I'd be really curious to hear from Mark, Kaylee, Joe. What does it look like for you when you're collaborating with some of these professionals? And do you ever bring in other professionals in your line of work? What does it look like there? I'll start with, Joe, you volunteered.
Yeah, I'll start it up. So oftentimes I will work with state attorneys and other CPAs actually.
Mhm.
My firm, we have 3 CPAs is all, so it's kind of hard to, and I don't know if other people are in a similar situation where there's just so much that people need to know that you can't do it all. So my firm primarily focuses in personal tax, 1040 tax, trusts, and then we also do nonprofits. So pretty much we are limited. We have other CPA partners that we partner with in Buffalo that do our corporation, our S Corp, our partnerships for our clients. So I think when to bring other people in is a great question, because a lot of times you may think you know exactly what the client needs, but there's always different ways of thinking about it. You might be limited. Maybe you're the client in another state and you're like, hey, I think I know this answer, but to be safe, let's go to a professional here. And something that I always do is I have a network, as I'm sure Mark and Kaylee do, where we talk amongst the CPAs. I think that's huge. Pretty much, when in doubt, I would go to somebody. I oftentimes need to go if I have a partnership question, if I have a corporation question, if my client's like, hey, do I get a credit for this? Stuff like that, where I do have the knowledge, but it may be limited. It might not be enough. And if I don't have complete competence, then I have to reach out.
We know enough to be dangerous, but we have to know when to bring someone else in. Excellent. Thank you for sharing, Joe. Kaylee, Mark, would you like to add to that and what your experience has been?
Sure. Yeah, and our every time we work with an advisor and a client, it's a good relationship, because I think Franco used the word quarterback, and that's exactly how we see the financial advisor, who knows all of the big picture and the goals of the client. When advisors contact us, I can review their whole life policy or their disability policy. Lots of things I can tell you about the policy, but I don't know, is this a good fit for the client? What are those things they hope to do, want to do? And that's what makes, I think, working with fee-only advisors especially so valuable, is that idea of what do we want to get to? How do these policies, at least in my world, policies help us get there, or are they helping at all? Is there something better out there? And just that idea to be able to say, here's what they have, but is it really meeting their goals? Because I don't always know all of those goals, and working with the advisor is fantastic. And sort of like Joe said, I have people at annuity insurance companies. They're attorneys who are tax people who really, really know the tax things about annuities, because I'm pretty sure I know a lot of stuff. But when it's a $200,000 taxable gain question, I really want to confirm with somebody who works for the annuity company, am I right, before I do that? So it happens. I think it happens all the time without, as I think about how many times I consult with other professionals, I don't necessarily even think about that, how many times I'm doing it a day to make sure that I'm giving the best advice of what what's in my lane, and what's above my pay grade.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing, Mark. And how about you, Kaylee? What's your thought process in your field on bringing in someone?
Absolutely. So, I think as an attorney, estate planning attorney, we're in this unique position where a lot of times we're meeting with someone and they've been referred to us from another advisor, and someone that they have a relationship with already. And so we're in this great position to then be able to take that referral and be able to collaborate with that professional. And what I find to be extremely great for the client, from our perspective, is they are getting the best product they can get, because you're getting everyone's perspective. And with estate planning, especially on the drafting side, obviously not the administration side, but on the drafting side, we tend to be very creative, and we try to think outside the box and try to come up with a plan that's going to work for every single family or client that we meet with. So it is not a one size fits all. And therefore, having the ability to collaborate is so important, because a lot of the professionals we're collaborating with already have this relationship with the client, and some, knowledge, some different information that we may not know, that we can build this plan together and create such a great product for them at the end of the day. That's not going to happen if, I meet with them and all of a sudden we do the planning and we do it in a week and it's done. It's very different than being able to collaborate and come up with pros and cons with a team of professionals. I think it really helps, especially with some of our clients that need hand holding. We have all this, their team members in the same room being able to hold their hands and walk them through, quite often a difficult discussion, especially when it comes to estate planning and talking about their future, their children's future. So I think it really is a wonderful thing for families.
Absolutely. And I think we can all agree, we're all here because we think it's an amazing idea to collaborate. But I really think for any young advisors listening in is to hear some examples of can you give me an example of a successful time that you leveraged someone else's expertise for a problem or situation that arose with a client that you were working with? Let's see, Joe.
All right, yeah. So I don't know, just a few weeks ago, we were working on a client that the husband, unfortunately, he was getting older. He's dementia is setting in and everything. And we were like, we really got to get this estate planning done. They had some issues with Medicare and Medicaid. And we said, like we're going to bring in an estate attorney no matter what, but like, let's kind of hand them off to them and let's collaborate with them, tell them what we want the end result kind of to be, and then let them do their thing, because there's no point in us trying to do it. We're not going to be as good as them, basically. So we went to Kaylee, we went to her people. We've got a couple of places in Buffalo that we use. And we just said, hey, how would you feel about taking on this engagement? And like we do everybody else. And I think the most important thing that comes out of that is we understand our limits, and then the client, like we talked about with like Mark said, they're getting the best product. It's important that we know our limits, and then we communicate what we want the end goal to be, and then say, hey, is this possible? And the estate attorney took them in. It's great communication between both firms is important. And as long as the estate attorney is going to treat our client like we treat our client, then we are very happy. So, yeah.
I love that. And how did you determine that was the right attorney to use? Is that someone that you'd used in the past before, or how did you know this was someone who's going to be willing to work with you?
So actually, in this particular attorney, we had a client that really wanted to use them already. We have our own contacts at the firm, except this client already wanted to use this attorney. So, we said, hey, that's fine. Let's form a relationship with them, make sure make sure we feel good enough with their work before. And we hit it off. She was excellent. She takes great care of our clients, and it's not just, a handoff, easy engagement for them. They really take the time to understand our clients and communicate with us and the client. And I think that's the biggest thing for me, the competency, the ethics, and the communication. Those would be my big three things that when handing off a client of my own that I need to see in the other professional. And I did, and it was kind of lucky, but we're going to continue using them. So that was great.
Look at that. You wasn't someone you typically use, but now you just grew your network. Now you have another resource
Yeah.
at your disposal to work with clients.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that, Joe. How about anyone else? Any specific examples of where you had a successful collaboration that you could share with everyone?
I can jump in
Going off
here.
mute? All right.
Yeah. So I guess it was a couple months ago. We had an estate planning attorney reach out to us and say, basically, hey, I have a client who currently has an estate issue, and I think that his financial advisor is perhaps not doing the best by him. He has a $2 million face value whole life insurance policy that he's paying $50,000 in premiums on per year. And so I said, well, listen, we're obviously we don't sell insurance here. We're fee only, but we'd be happy to talk to him, figure out what his goals are, figure out if this policy really kind of makes sense for him. And so we met with the client. This was a kind of larger wirehouse that was pushing some of these products on him. He was using them more for investments, and just looking at all of his goals, looking at his situation, we found that that policy was really inadequate for what he wanted to accomplish. So what we did was we got in touch with an independent insurance agency, had them review the policy, let them know about the client's goals, and said, hey, I think this is really what he wants to accomplish based on what he's told us. And we were able to find a policy that didn't have the frills and the bells and whistles that this wirehouse had included in them, and it was really almost a tenth of the price of what it was, and it was exactly the same amount of death benefit that he needed. In fact, it was actually more death benefit than he needed. And because he was in this estate issue, we were also able to leverage the estate planning attorney's expertise and create an entity that held the policy so that when that policy comes to fruition, it wasn't included in his estate. So we mitigated estate tax issues. We were able to get him a more reasonable policy that hit his goals. And we were also able to redirect and free up funds so that he could fund his retirement that he wanted to. So it was really an instance in which we were able to leverage multiple different professionals and bring them together to create a really great outcome for a client.
Excellent example. Thank you so much for sharing that, Franco. And a good example of how it's not just one discipline, right, where we have to bring in one professional, but really bringing about a plethora of them to accomplish this one goal. And it started with life insurance, and somehow we're touching on investments, we're touching on estate planning. They're all talk to each other. So I think this is such a good example of how all of our professions really do overlap. So thank you for sharing that. Kaylee, do you have an example of a successful leverage?
Sure. I have, a few examples that I'll keep it brief, but one instance, I was actually handling an administration of a fairly large trust and estate. And, the client, which was basically the surviving spouse in this situation, really had no idea what they were trying to take on in terms of the taxes. In this particular estate, we really needed to file a specific tax return to get portability, in this case, because of the level of their assets, and to basically give her a little bit of a leg up, if something were to happen to her. And unfortunately, the individual that she had been working with, kind of similar to Franco's story, didn't have any background on any sort of estate tax returns or 706 or 709s or any sort of background there. And in fact, had never done one, and had sent over a draft. And, I looked at the draft, and there were a lot of things missing, a lot of things, that were not good. And that puts you in a really tough position, because you don't want to be, disrespectful. You want to, stay professional, but at the same time, you want to do best for your client. And so I kind of went back to the drawing board. I had been working with another fiduciary. I was working with an advisor that had brought me in as the estate attorney to assist with the administration. And so I had reached out to collaborate with that advisor and say, we really need to talk about bringing in, someone that has a background on, estate tax returns to properly do this specific return. And so I was able to contact a professional CPA that I knew had done, a ton of, 706 tax returns, and understood how it worked and what we needed to look at. Especially, this had a lot of business interests. We needed to be very careful and specific on it. And so that was just a great way of bringing someone in that had this knowledge base, and helping the client at the end of the day. Just one other tiny example. Sometimes I love leveraging other professionals when I have a client that I sit down with and they're almost stalled. They almost don't want to move forward because there's just so many unanswered questions for them, and they're talking about estate planning and what they want to do with their estate, and they feel super overwhelmed. And sometimes having the support of an advisor, a CPA, a financial professional, bringing them together almost gives them that confidence to move forward, because they have all the parties in the room saying, hey, this is a great idea. Let's do this. We need to do this. Is going to protect your children. This is going to protect your spouse. This is going to be great for your grandkids. And so I love leveraging other professionals to almost get the client to move forward if they're open to it, because it almost gives them what they need to know, okay, we're all on the same page, we can do this together. And so it's that hand-holding mentality that I always go back to. So those are my examples of those techniques.
And such a unique perspective too, because I personally never thought of utilizing other professionals for purposes of moving forward in my own field. So I think that's a very unique situation and example that I really appreciate you sharing, Kaylee. Excellent. How about you, Mark? Any examples that you can share of a successful time you used or you worked with an outside professional?
Every day, because we work, so our business practice is working with fee-only financial advisors. So every time a financial advisor, fee-only advisor has clients or questions about insurance. So I'm probably, to Kaylee's, who is, it was nice having that advisor help move forward. That's my day, because these clients have already said, Yesenia, Franco, you're my people. I'm coming to you for help. And so by the time Yesenia or Franco and I have reviewed existing policies, they need term insurance to get their kids through college, or disability coverage because they're a sole proprietor and don't have any right now, and they're the primary breadwinner. They've already said, Franco and Yesenia, they're my people. And we do that every day to say, and here are 3 or 4 options, or sometimes it's one. I love bullet points. My emails look like an A, B, C, D, and then they have the sub bullet points and sometimes sub bullet points. So I really like having advisors there to say, Mark, that was, I see A, B, C, D, and E. I'm feeling that maybe, C and D are maybe a little too much for these clients, which is great because advisors know the clients better than I do. So every day it's that, just being able to work with advisors and say, here's what, they're basically paying these advisors for their advice. I'm coming in to help alongside. And so for me, it's a leveraging every day.
That's amazing. I really appreciate you sharing that, because it really does sometimes take a few people's opinions to get a client moving in the right direction. And so that's just another way we can utilize, not just to use in their own field, but really kind of piggybacking off of what Kaylee said, just helping them see a separate perspective as to why we should move forward with choice A, choice B, whatever it is.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Now let's talk a little bit about what are some of the things you wish other professionals knew or were considerate of when they're bringing you in? And so some background on this question, it's probably more, I'm going to say more applicable to Joe, Kaylee, and Mark, is, are there things that you wish advisors were considerate of when they brought you in? Or is there an approach that you would appreciate when they're bringing you in? Maybe you could shed some light on that.
And I can go first this
Yeah.
time. We'll save Joe from having to go first every time. I think because the advisors all work so differently and every client is different, it's really hard to say, here's something that works for everybody. In my world, it tends to be things like, I had an advisor today send me a copy of somebody's policy from 1955.
Wow.
It's sort of like, imagine seeing the photo of a 1955 Chevy and saying, what is it worth? What does it look like today? I got nothing. I mean, some of the policies were from the 60s, the Beatles were brand new. So some of those things end up being, just having to go back to advisors and say, I really need something more recent than before, I was born. But we all, it's a learning curve in trying to get from that. And I think at least sometimes in my world, it's a lot of, it's almost like the game of telephone. I can tell Yesenia, I'd like the client to call Mass Mutual and ask for an in-force illustration if they stop paying premiums or change the dividends to reduce premiums. That goes from me to Yesenia, to the client who has to be on the phone with somebody at Mass Mutual who might have been there a week. All those words mean something to me. They should mean something to the Mass Mutual person, but in between, we get a lot of variability. And so I think sometimes that's almost just a no, sometimes this is going to go smoothly. We might have to ask for it 2 or 3 times. Eventually we'll get it. But sometimes the lingo, I think, is something that's hard to translate for clients who they bought these particular policies in the 50s and 60s. They haven't thought of them again. So sometimes just getting that may take a little while.
So how do you overcome that challenge a little bit? So I'm hearing that you would like a little bit more information regarding the client. Maybe there's some challenges in communication when it's going through multiple parties. Do you have a good way to solve that issue?
It actually ends up just sort of working organically. The more we work with advisors,
Mm-hmm.
the more often they're used to seeing, here's the kind of things I'd like. We have brochures about if we're going to review policies, here's the things we'd like for an annuity, or here's the thing we'd like for life insurance. So like most things, there's a learning curve, but it tends to be pretty smooth. So much of it depends on what the client drops in your lap. And sometimes that's all we've got, and we just may have to work on getting more.
Very good. Excellent. Well, thank you for sharing that, Mark. And Kaylee, how about you? What are some things when an advisor or even another professional are bringing you in? What are some things you wish they were more considerate of, or how should they approach you when bringing you in?
So I think, and this is obviously tough in terms of, advice I can provide in terms of what we do, but I think one of the things that happens probably in a lot of professions is, making sure that we can actually do the legal work that we're being, referred to for. I think sometimes, advisors out there think that, we can do everything, and I would love to do everything. I wish I could do everything. But a lot of attorneys and CPAs and insurance advisors and anybody specializes in different areas. And so, for me, for example, our firm handles, estate planning, estate administration, tax planning. And I've gotten some very interesting calls where they want me to defend a medical malpractice suit, or it's a professional advisor that's worked with me in the past and said, I really need you to do this really crazy corporate transaction. And I'm so complimented, but I try to be very clear on what my limitations are. And I know there are attorneys out there that try to do, they dabble in different areas. We try to stick with what we're good at. And, we all do estate planning. We all have, LLMs in estate planning. And so we try not to deviate from that. And so I think the hardest thing is trying to make sure when you're getting the referral and collaborating, it's actually something that we can collaborate on and not something that is not really our area of practice. So I think that seems to be the most common thing that happens to us is, and I hate saying no. And I hate having to say, oh, unfortunately, I don't specialize in, insurance defense litigation or, liability insurance litigation or anything like that. And so that's probably what I try to explain to different professionals. I do estate planning and estate administrations and tax planning, and I can help you with that. But I try to stay in my lane as much as possible.
Excellent. So advisors should know what the professional actually focuses on before introducing the client to.
Yeah,
it seems obvious, but
yeah.
Very good point. Probably something we've all been guilty of, especially if we have our go-to professionals that we want to use. Kind of like what Joe said earlier, where this is what I do. We have I don't know everything. We need to consult with other CPAs. Maybe it's a different area. So I love those points. Just be cognizant of what it is you're asking the professionals that you're working with and make sure it's something that they are indeed a subject matter expert on. Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that, Kaylee. How about you, Joe? I'm sure as a CPA, you have thoughts on how we can be considerate.
Yeah. I would say the biggest thing and a differentiator for the CPAs is we are a completely deadline driven profession. Um, a lot of us have a 3:15 deadline, a 4:15, a 5:15, a 9:15, a 10:15, 11:15, 1:31. I mean, there's, you name it, almost every month you've got something. Um, and like I said, I personally have a very tough 4:15 and 5:15. Um, we do some trusts and stuff, so 3:15 is not too bad for me. But depending on the person that you're talking to, if you're going to a partnership, or if you're going to a partnership CPA that focuses in partnerships on 310 for a question, they're not going to take too kindly for it. And if you go and you expect an answer right away from me on 412, it's just not coming, unfortunately. Sorry. Like, I know everybody has clients and they're your most important thing. They're the one that pays your salary. But depending on who you're working with at different times when they're a CPA, it can be kind of hard to get a hold of them, and you kind of got to be respectful of their time, because I think everyone on this call knows it's a bad time around 4:15 for us. And we do work a lot of hours. So I do appreciate the CFPs and, the advisors in the world. They're like, hey, I have a tax question. It's 2024. I know you're working on 2023 stuff. Does not have to get done in Q1. Let's look at this in June. Um, so, so to them, thank you. And yeah, that's the only thing that I would really hope that younger people would be a little bit more mindful of in their careers. But yeah,
That's
thanks.
such a good point, because as an advisor, I know sometimes our clients are asking us for a question, they want it tomorrow. If we can't answer it, we're trying to get the question answered ASAP. And I think that's a really good point, is that when we're working with outside professionals, we can't put them on our timeline as well. We do need to be mindful of their timeline, especially CPAs that are deadline driven. I know a lot of lovely CPAs that turn not so lovely when you try talking to them about right before a deadline on something that's not deadline relevant. And so I think that's a wonderful point, and something we could all be cognizant of. And I think is for CPAs, just letting advisors know about some of those deadlines, especially the more obscure one. I don't know if 11:15 is one. Is it really? Is there an 11?
If you extend if you extend a nonprofit or something like that.
So I didn't even know about that one. Thank you for educating me on that. But opportunity for all of us to just educate the professionals we're working on some of our own limitations and things that help us work better with each other. So thank you for sharing that, Joe. Franco, this may or may not apply to you. But what are some things that you try to be cognizant of when working with outside professionals? And have you ever had a situation where you had a run-in because you weren't?
Um, a run-in because I wasn't. Yeah, I am sure that over the last 7 years or so, I've had a CPA yell at me once or twice. That's just part of the stress that comes with filing a million returns on a short deadline. Um, you know, I I try and be cognizant of that, especially being a former tax filer myself. Understanding what it's like to put the numbers in the boxes, make sure it's correct, go through review, present it to the client, go back through and review it again, filing. It's a lot of work. Same thing with extensions. I can remember that very, very clearly, and so I try and put myself in those shoes whenever we're around the tax deadline. Um, I think one of the things I was thinking about as everybody else was talking is that I have had some professionals come over to me and say, "Hey, I have X, Y, and Z client for you. I know you can help them out. Here's their situation." And I think one of the things I was thinking about was that one of the things I would like them to know is that we might not be the right fit for everybody, and that's okay. We likely have a lot of other financial planners that are fee only and fiduciaries that we can give them that may be a better fit. Recently, I just had another attorney reach out to me and say, "Hey, I have this client. They have, $40,000 in credit card debt. They can't pay their bills, and I'd like you to take them on as a client." And I thought to myself, we're actually going to be burdening this client if we take them on. Our fee is not going to be helping them at all. So I need to find a financial planner that works hourly or works on a project basis that can help them. And so that was one of the things I was thinking of as far as, that interaction between professionals and how we can be cognizant of what they have going on, but also how they can be cognizant of, maybe some of our limitations and how we can best help their clients that they have.
Absolutely. Just throughout this conversation, I think something I'm gleaning is that we could all benefit from really sitting down with the professionals that we work with, not necessarily as it relates to a specific client, but maybe educating each other on what are our strengths, what are our limitations, who are the ideal clients that we would love to see you bring us in on, or certain situations. So that way we don't have those kind of run-ins and challenges where we're introducing clients that may or may not be a good fit. And now we have to say, can't help you with that. Here's someone else. Great examples from everyone. Tell me a little bit about some of the challenges. We talked about how collaborating is great, some examples of where we had some really good results come about from collaboration. But what are some of the challenges that you faced other than, we want people to be considerate of some of our limitations, but do you have examples of challenges and situations where maybe it didn't work out? And we could talk about why.
I have examples.
Oh, let's hear them.
Oh,
Just jump in here. So no, I mean, it just happened. So that's why it's kind of like top of my mind. There are times in our profession where sometimes we work or collaborate and
I would say,
the professional, is making a recommendation that may not fit that
well,
specific
it
situation.
did what you said to.
Sorry, I'm going to ask if everyone on the line, if you're not speaking, if you could please put yourself on mute.
Really tight.
Thank you. Sorry, go ahead, Kaylee.
No problem. So in this particular scenario or example, I was working with a CPA. It was not Joe. So, Joe would be doing a great job. But I was working with a CPA, and this particular CPA had been in practice for a long time, was obviously, had seen clients long before me, had been in the practice for a while. You kind of understand where I'm going with that. So they were making some very specific recommendations about drafting a trust in a specific way that was not going to work. And that's really challenging because you want to be professional. You don't want to be disrespectful. And you're very respectful because they've referred the person to you, but at the same time, it's not a good idea. Or, it's going to cause a problem with this person's estate, or they're not thinking there's another side, to the equation that maybe they haven't considered. In this particular example, they were recommending a certain type of trust that would have increased the expense, time, complexity of the administration when the individual passed away. And I didn't think it was necessary, and felt like at the end of the day, when someone passes away and you hit the play button, you have to follow all these intricate details that you set up. And when you're setting something up and you're setting it up knowing it is probably going to fail or it's not going to work out well, those types of recommendations are very hard to get around with professionals. And so it's challenging for me because I want to create a delicate balance between saying, okay, yes, I understand where you're coming from. However, I don't know if this will work. And then if they kind of push you further, that can be very challenging for me because I try very hard to be, Switzerland and be neutral and make everybody happy. Everybody gets along. But I also know that it's my ethical responsibility to if this person has engaged me, this client has engaged me, that I have to ethically do best by the client and give them, the best service I can provide with the best advice. And so that's really been a challenge. The other challenge I've faced is I've worked with some larger, fiduciary companies, representing a client, some very, very large, banks that have referred someone. And sometimes they also have their own set of ideas, and want to do things a very, very specific way. And maybe the client has come to me and said to me on the side, I don't know if I really want to do it that way, but they're really pushing me on this. And then I'm kind of this middleman that has to kind of navigate around that. But at the end of the day, it's the client that I represent, and I always try to go back to that, to tell myself that, especially when I'm trying to keep everyone happy, reminding myself that at the end of the day, I represent this person, this client. And so I have to do what's right for them. And so I think those are the biggest challenges that I face, is getting, poor advice, and they don't mean it, the professional doesn't mean it, but it may not work with that, particular, person or client or family. So that's my example.
That's excellent. And I'd love to kind of follow up on that and ask, what was the result of it? So we had this differing recommendation. You didn't agree with it. What did you do?
So in the second situation, the client ended up moving to another advisor because they didn't like how much they were being pushed by this large group advisor. And so they had come to me and said, do you have anyone else that we could work with? Because we really don't like this feeling of being pressured. And so in the second example I gave, the person actually went to a different advisor, to, recreate a relationship that would, be less pressure driven, and get the results that they wanted, which was unique for me because I was kind of the one that was brought in by the other one. It's kind of like Franco's example, that this client was working with an advisor, and then, an estate planning attorney found, referred them to another advisor. And that was kind of similar to my situation here. In, my first example, we're yet to see that result because this just happened about 2 weeks ago. And so I put together a proposal, which is the way I kind of dealt with the scenario. I put together a proposal of options where I could say, okay, this is an option that was provided at our meeting. Here's the pros, here are the cons, and here's an alternative option, so that I can kind of give the client, the pros and cons, and give them the option, the choice. So we don't know yet what the result is, but I did put together a very long proposal to see what they're going to go with. But I was trying to be very delicate when I was giving those, different options, so that this advisor, this particular accountant, knew that I wasn't trying to, just step all over their idea. I wanted to collaborate with them, but also give the client the best option possible.
Absolutely. And I think you touched on something that Joe mentioned earlier, which is when you're reaching out to someone, it's because they're the expert in that area. So he mentioned, I gave them what I would like to see, but I left the how up to that professional because they know how to do it best. That's why you're bringing them in. So it almost seems like this advisor wasn't doing that. They were essentially saying, I want this, and this is how I want you to do it.
That's right. And that's very challenging, because you want to be, respectful, but at the same time, they're not staying in their lane, is the best way to put it, and really pushing
Right.
for something that may not work, to create that how. They're giving the referral, but then they're also trying to do the work, and that doesn't always work well.
Absolutely. I think any professional in any field doesn't want to be told how to do their job. They're being brought in because they're going to say what they think is the best way to
Right.
do a how. Mark, Joe, Franco, any thoughts on that? Any challenges you face, whether along that vein or something different?
Yeah, hearing Kaylee's story, it makes me understand a lot of the challenges that I've had with some professionals in collaborating, right? Because they have probably had experiences like Kaylee is having, and I'm sure that Mark and Joe have had, where they have a financial advisor that, you know, means well, or hasn't exactly been up to date on the most recent laws changes and different things like that. And so, they end up viewing that advisor, and maybe even possibly advisors as a collective, as a group of folks who really just don't know exactly what they're doing, right? And so I can think of an instance in which we had an accountant who really just did not want us anywhere near a tax planning meeting. And it wasn't because he had anything personally against us. He just didn't like financial advisors. He felt that they never added any value. All they are stock pickers. And so we finally were able to go to a tax planning meeting. The accountant begrudgingly let us go with the client and the accountant. And, you know, the client was talking to us about wanting to still save for retirement, but the client was worried about how much in pre-tax accounts they had. So we started to discuss rolling up his pre-tax IRA to his 401k, clearing a conduit so we could do backdoor Roth IRA contributions. The accountant who had been in business for a long time and you know, he was not sure that that could be done. But after a brief recess to his office, he reappeared and said, okay, I've done some research and I found that this is actually a viable strategy so we can move forward with it. And since then, we have always been welcomed in the tax planning meetings. And so I think that proving yourself as a financial advisor, financial planner to some of these professionals and saying, hey, you know, I'm not just a stock picker here. I know a little bit. I'm going to let you do the how, but this is kind of, you know, what we're thinking with the client and the client's goals and all of that. That has helped me be able to build trust with professionals going forward.
That's a great example because we often forget we're not the only professional someone has worked with. They've had their own experiences and maybe be biased because of it. But being able to show that value to the professional and letting them do their thing, I think is a really important aspect of that is we want to collaborate, not tell you how to do your job. Again, CPA was instrumental in that scenario. And you were able to add value. And so can continue to add value going forward. So I think that's a great example of a challenge turned into a good experience. Joe, Mark, you guys have any specific challenges that you'd love to share with collaboration?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I'm sure I go through it all the time, and I'm sure Kaylee goes through it all the time, and I'm sure Mark too. There's no such thing as an easy, quick answer for the most part. I think I've had times, and an example of this is I just had an advisor walk into my office and be like, "Hey, you know, this client so and so selling their house for $1 million. How much in capital gains tax are they going to pay?" And just kind of stands there and looks at me, and I'm like, "What? Like this is this is more loaded than you think." Um, and they're like, okay, so like this isn't like a 2-minute thing. And I'm like, no, like I got to understand this person. Is he married? Is he not married? What's the exclusion amount based on if he's married? Has he been in the residence for 2 years? What's his AGI? Are we doing this at 15? Are we doing this at 20%? And sometimes some professionals think that it's an easy question, but that's just because they don't know what goes into the answer. So I think sometimes that can get difficult. And just for the record, CPAs are nice people. If you reach out to them at a bad time, they'll still be nice to you at some point. But I do think some things can be people don't think about them as complicated as they should be, and that's never a good thing.
Well, I think it's acknowledging what we don't know, right? And educating other professionals on, I understand you asked me this question, you want a quick answer, but if you want the right answer, it's not going to be 2 seconds. And this all comes down to each of us acknowledging our own blind spots. That's why they're asking you, because they don't know. And sometimes we have to be willing to wait for that answer. And Joe, I do have to touch on this. Some of my favorite people in this world are CPAs, but it goes back to what you said, the deadlines. We have to be cognizant of the deadlines. But you bring a really good point. We can't operate on or expect everyone else to operate on our own timelines as well. And if you want proper research, a proper response to your questions, sometimes you have to wait for it.
Exactly.
Mark, how about you? Any specific challenges in the insurance arena when you've been working with other professionals?
No, I mean, it's all similar to everybody else's. a lot of financial planners start off in the insurance industry working for one of the big firms for 2 years and start their own thing. And so they sold insurance for 2 years in the late 70s and have opinions or things about some things that may or may not work that way anymore. Joe's thing, review this annuity real quick for me. I've got a meeting in, an hour. Yeah, I can give you a 15 minutes worth, but it's going to be not as good as what I could do tomorrow or the day after. I think nothing in particular, just the same things that, when we have advisors or professionals come to us with certain things, we try not to do those to others. And it was sort of like Joe mentioned, but when you do, because all of us mess up sometimes, I love when people just own up to it. Mark, I am so sorry. I thought I sent this to you on Friday. I flaked. I'm meeting with the clients in 2 hours. If there's any way you can get me a term quote between now and then, that'd be great. If not, I understand. Because those usually get to the top of my list. Because I
Humility.
understand because we've all done that. And I'm going to try to help out because I know that's going to make that meeting go a whole lot smoother.
Absolutely. I think the expectation, right?
Right.
They didn't expect it in the next 2 hours. They acknowledged a shortcoming, should have sent it to you sooner, would appreciate if you could do it.
Yeah.
It's funny how we're much more, I think all of us, willing to help someone in those scenarios because we've all been there rather than someone who's demanding an answer in an hour.
We're standing in your office waiting for you to answer the capital gains question.
Right.
Like I have to give you an answer, else you're not going to leave. So I got to come up with something.
It's not stressful at all. Trying to answer.
The answer is 7.
Absolutely. So I think something we could all take away from in our own industries, being humble when working with other professionals, not demanding a certain timeline, just being cognizant of others, what they have going on, I think will make for a much more productive collaborative relationship amongst all of us. So excellent. So I think we've talked a lot about why this is a good thing. This works out very well for our clients. We've had some examples of some very successful collaboration. We know what some of the challenges are. Something I'd like to start touching on is, especially because we are fiduciaries, we're doing what's in the best interest of the client. Sometimes when fees come up, it may feel like that's a challenge when it comes into play with collaboration. If we're working collaborative with other attorneys or CPAs or insurance agents or their advisors, it takes more time than if we try to do it on our own. And of course, we all have to be paid for the work that we're doing, but I'm going to pose this question to all of you. Have you ever been in a situation where you have to balance doing what's right for the client and maybe it goes beyond the scope of engagement and what you were initially hired to do? And how do you handle that challenge? Who wants to go first?
I'll speak a little bit on this.
All right.
So I think the biggest thing here is just to be transparent with the client. As soon as you recognize that you may not be able to fully do this all by yourself or in the time frame allotted, the most important thing is to, make that apparent and then bring in whoever can get you over that hump and, work with them and be transparent with the client as well and say, hey, like we have to put you on this other engagement too. You're gonna have to sign this. These are the fees that are assigned with this, and just be very upfront with it, because the last thing you want to do is just throw them a huge bill, or your hard work is not being realized in the fee billing also. When I worked in public accounting, we would have a base fee, and then in our engagement letter, we would say, this is how much we think it's going to be. If anything comes up outside of this engagement, these are our hourly rates. And I assume that's how, the law firms do it. I'm sure Kaylee can talk more about that. But I would say communication at the beginning and understanding what the engagement is, pricing that, and then outside of the engagement, if you have to bring somebody in, just be as transparent as possible and explain why, and then what's the outcome from that. So I'll hang up.
Absolutely. Transparency is key. People, in general, clients don't mind paying for the services as long as they know what they are up front. So I appreciate you sharing that. From the, I'm going to pick on you now, Kaylee. From the attorney's perspective, how does this all work out when you're trying to do what's best for the client, but maybe you're running into a, this is outside of my scope situation?
Absolutely. And this is Joe's right. I mean, like the attorneys are so specific on this generally with their engagement letters. I mean, I know, in my situation, it really depends on how outside the scope we're going. I mean, there are certain things that, happen and you kind of assume they're going to happen. Someone transfers a property into their trust and maybe the property appraiser wants a copy of the certificate of trust or a copy of the trust. And yeah, that's something else that we have to do, but it kind of goes hand in hand with it. That's very different than starting a relationship with someone, engaging them, and then they decide, oh, by the way, I also want you to form this LLC, or I also need some, advice on my mother's trust, and she passed away a few years ago, and I need you to help me look at, the provisions of that trust. And so, when we have things like that, it's very similar to what Joe mentioned. We do have a section in our engagement letter that has hourly rates. If we are being retained hourly for something that's not within the scope. So for example, if we're creating a revocable trust, a will, healthcare surrogate, power of attorney, all the standard, structural documents, base documents that you generally do with estate planning, that's our scope of employment. And we generally have a flat fee for that. But then if we're going beyond that scope, let's say someone says, I also need you to review this other trust that, for my mom or dad or whoever it is, that generally would be then done on an hourly basis. So it just really depends on the situation, but having that provision in the engagement letter is very helpful if they're really going beyond the scope of what you're doing. It's easy to answer questions here and there if it's just a minor question or how to do something that maybe is a quick answer. No attorney generally minds that for the most part, but really doing an entirely different project or going beyond the scope is definitely important to capture that and be transparent, as you and Joe were talking about. Yesenia, being transparent is so important. And we've had that scenario where all of a sudden someone says, oh, by the way, I also need to do lifetime documents for my child because they're turning 18. I need to add that in, whatever that may be, and we can kind of come up with some sort of plan to add that in. So that's very important, just to be honest about it.
Absolutely. How about Mark and Franco? Any thoughts there?
I think, the only thing I could think about with regards to fees, obviously we're fee only, and so when clients engage with us, it's a huge engagement, right? So no matter how much time I put into it, it doesn't matter. I'm not getting billed any or billing hourly or anything like that. But I can remember a situation in which we had a trust litigator working for one of our clients, and the client understood the billing and understood all of that. But what she didn't understand was the concept of what constituted work. And so when she received, a $2,000 bill for reading emails, right, she was very much shocked. But that is work. And when the client is writing novels in the emails and it takes, a couple hours to process these things, that is work as well. And so, being very diligent about outlining what exactly is work, I think is important as well, and something that I'll always remember, definitely going forward.
And I'll pose the question to all of you too, specifically as it relates to working with each other. Has there been instances where maybe the fees weren't transparent because you started working, you asked, the advisor asked the attorney a few questions and then the client got a bill for that? Or have you seen it or seen any instances where the fees were higher because of collaboration, or that just hasn't been the case in your experience?
I can answer this one quickly, just because we work with so many advisors who work some on a annual retainer, some on a monthly subscription, some on a project, some on an hourly. We have in our system when we're sending proposals and things like that, that we have some advisors who say, who will make an introduction and say, Mark, this was a project client. I recommended they contact you for some term life insurance. And they're telling me they're a project client because what they don't want to do is get copied on emails later when we're making recommendations, because to Franco's point, well, now all of a sudden they're reading those emails and the client may be coming back to them. And so then it becomes another hourly, there may be another hourly bill. So on our side, I'd say the majority of advisors and clients we're working with are on a AUM model, monthly subscription, annual retainer fee, but we will have advisors who say, this is a project client, I'm making the introduction, but really I don't want to be included anymore, because then all of a sudden I'm doing, as Franco said, work and reading the emails. Maybe if they're, they know they can reach out to me if they have questions, but at this point it's a handoff. I don't want to be in there, so that we don't have that kind of issue about should I send a bill, should I not scenario.
That's a very good example, just being cognizant of the other professionals' billing, not just your own. And what are the implications of bringing them in and making sure that they're being transparent, and you're being transparent too. I'm bringing so and so in, they're going to have their own separate fees. We'll have that conversation. But just being cognizant, I think, just outside of our own bubble, not just what we are billing, but what other people are billing, which is a reality of collaboration, and it's not a bad thing.
Right.
But just being transparent, I think, is what it all comes down to. So very interesting situation, Mark. I appreciate you sharing that.
All right.
So now we've talked a lot about, okay, now the fees, how do we take that into consideration when we're working with other people? I'd love to hear about how each of you have developed your own network of professionals. So I think it takes a special kind of professional who's willing and able to collaborate. So how have you built your own network of professionals that you feel comfortable referring out to? Because that is our most precious gift when we do bring in someone else. This is a referral. We're expecting them to give the same service we would to our own clients. So how do you find these professionals and how do you nurture those relationships?
I can jump in here. Financial planning is interesting, right? Because we have all these different pillars within the CFP. So I need to find estate planning attorneys. I also need to find insurance agents. I also need to find accountants and everybody else in between, right? And so one of the things that I've really worked hard to do is be very active in professional organizations. So being on the regional board of directors for NAPFA has allowed me to meet with fee-only planners from across the country. And so when I do get that client from Oregon, right, that needs an estate planning attorney, well, I know an advisor in Oregon that's fee-only that works very similar to me. Let me reach out to them and see whom they like, right? And then I'll get those three professionals and then I'll start interviewing myself. Okay, do they check off this? Are they flat rate? Do they bill hourly? How do we communicate, right? Is there actual communication going on, or are they just ghosting me? So going through kind of an interview process with them, and then you kind of narrow down to who you think would be best. You give the client a couple options, few options. But I think the really scary thing with developing a new network of professionals is that first time you send a client to somebody, because they can be great for somebody else's advisor and they can pass, all your check boxes on your interview. But until they're actually working on your client and you're getting that feedback from the client on how it's going, you don't actually know. And so my group of professionals that I trust have been folks who I've been able to go into the weeds with clients, and we've been able to emerge with client solutions and happy clients as well. And so those are very, very important things to me. And so just building that network from other people's good experiences, I'd say would be the best place to start.
Excellent. So using trusted people you trust, even if it's not in that field, using their recommendations to start finding other professionals to work with. And I'd love to touch on a little bit what you said, which is you're actually interviewing these professionals before you make the recommendation. So you're not just getting names, giving them to the clients. You're actually speaking to them first. How receptive have they been to that? Just, you're essentially interviewing them to see if they're worth putting on a list. Have they been receptive to these conversations?
Yeah, I think that you have to be very transparent with them. Sometimes, with attorneys, I've had the, I've never wanted to give off the impression that I'm fee shopping, right? So I'll talk to an attorney and I'll say, okay, how much is a standard engagement? What's your range on do you think? And I'll let them know, this is not about cost. This is about quality, right? So I want to make sure that we have the best experience for the client. And so I'm making sure that, I can be very transparent with the client and how much the estimate is, right? But I also want you to know that we're not just trying to find the lowest, price attorney that we can find in the realm. And so they've been pretty receptive to it once you kind of lead with that, because otherwise I think that perhaps they've had experiences where people are just shopping for the lowest price, and I think that is has left a bad taste in their mouth.
And again, we come back to that approach and how important it is. Very good. How about Kaylee? Do you have any thoughts on this?
So absolutely. I think that, for me, in terms of establishing relationships and how that all works, it's happened very organically for me because I have, Franco brought up some really good points. I was part of a lot of professional networks. And then I did a lot of speaking engagements, especially when I first started out as an estate planning attorney. I really tried to just immerse myself in that field and get to know everyone. And, you start to see similar faces at different events and different groups, and you start to build that rapport. And then I remember one of my partners said to me, don't ever turn down a lunch. So if someone wants to get to know you, don't ever turn down a lunch. And so I took that to heart, and I had a lot of lunches. So I went to a lot of different things and I tried to really get to know everyone. And that was very, very helpful because I was able to develop a lot of relationships with individuals and with different groups, so that I knew who I could make a referral to. And I've been very lucky that I've been able to work with a group of professionals, both in, the advising role, whether it's financial advising, in the CPA role, insurance role. I've been able to really connect clients with the right fit because, as we all know, clients have different personalities, and we know that some of them may work well, depending on the team of individuals you're referring them to. And so I try to be very careful with referring to the right person if it's the right fit. And I try to be very honest too, if I don't know who they could work with, or maybe I don't have a referral in that particular area. I try to be very honest with them because sometimes clients will push us and say, well, we really need a name. We really need a name. And I try to be honest and say, I can give you a name, but I've never gotten any feedback from any clients that I've referred to them. So I can't tell you whether it's going to be wonderful or not, or whether it's going to be the right fit because I just don't have that feedback yet. And so I try to be very upfront about that if I know ahead of time if they really want names and things like that. So I think, to cap it all off, I think I'm very lucky that I've been able to develop the relationships that I have just through having lunches and going out and going to different events and networking. And now that I have children, it's not as easy to go to some of those evening events, that happen right during bedtime and bath time. So I continue to have those lunches because I can still get out and try to go to a few conferences here and there when I can. But I started early, and that was another thing my partner told me is do it before you have kids. Meet everybody before you have those kids, because when you have them, it's even harder. So I've been very fortunate in organically being able to develop those relationships.
Those are such excellent tidbits of advice. And I think all of our young advisors listening, that's probably going to be their favorite. I just got to go to lunch.
Go to lunch. Just don't say no to lunch.
Just don't say no to lunch. Excellent. I love that. Mark and Joe, how have you been able to build your network of advisors that you work with or other professionals?
Sure. So I'll go. So as Franco said, I am the other side of that call. When advisors are interviewing people, I'm the one they're interviewing to see if we're a good fit to help with clients' insurance. So I do 2 or 3 new advisor calls. Sometimes it's 2 or 3 a week. Sometimes it's 2 or 3 a month. My team is doing them all the time to talk about what we do, how we work with advisors. And so we go to conferences where fee-only advisors at different fee-only advisory groups meet. We're exhibitors there. We do webinars that provide continuing education for CFPs to tune in and listen about insurance. We do, like I mentioned, we do those calls where advisors are asking us, how are you different than A, B, and C down the street, or all those different things. So that's how we're meeting that group. As far as referrals, we hardly ever give referrals because we're brought in not as sort of the point person, but as one of the subcontractors to the financial advisor's general contractor, if you will. So most of the time when somebody comes to us, the clients already have that financial advisor. The advisor has already figured out some CPAs that they like, or clients already have a CPA. They might already have an attorney. So we very rarely are giving referrals because when we're brought into the picture, most of those things are already set up. But for us, finding the advisors to partner with, that's what we're trying to set up. And not everybody's a good fit. Especially sometimes when we're working with clients in the long-term care world, they really want to sit down with somebody. And if they're in Buffalo, sorry, I can't hop on a plane to go to Buffalo. And so sometimes you might just need to find somebody locally for some clients, but most clients are happy to work with phone, email, websites, all the stuff that most of us do without even thinking about it. So that's sort of how are we meeting those professionals and interacting with them.
Yeah, and I think that's a really unique take because like you just mentioned, you're being brought in from the advisors, not necessarily referring out to different advisors. So I think that's a really unique perspective on how you're getting in front of your target audience to be someone to be referred to. So thank you for sharing that, Mark. That's definitely a different perspective that we appreciate. How about you, Joe? How are you developing your network of trusted professionals?
Yeah, so first, I think everything Kaylee said was fantastic. I'm in a similar boat with the CPA, and a lot of my connections have come from continuing ed events and just being part of like the AICPA or the New York State Accountants Association or whatever I'm a part of. And then also our firms they partner with other firms in different states. So if I need to contact another state for another state tax law or something that I don't know, our firm already has somebody that we can reach out to. And it goes both ways. If somebody, in Ohio has a question about New York State tax law, they can reach out to us, we can reach out to them. So there are a bunch of firms that are part of these societies that all work together. And that is one way that I've kind of grown my network. And if I have a question, I know who to go to. Now, as far as I know, Mark and Kelly were talking about how important it is that first client you give. I would say just a word of advice that I always keep in mind is I might find somebody that is like, oh, we do trusts, and my firm doesn't really want to do, they don't want to do trusts. So if we find somebody that can do trusts, we're all of a sudden like, okay, we have 100 trusts. I can't wait to give it to all, like I can't wait to give all of them to this person. And no, we got to sit back and we got to be like, okay, this year for the 3/15 deadline, like we'll give them 2 trusts. And if they can do it, great. Next year we'll give them 5. Then we'll give them 20. And it's not all of a sudden like you don't want to trust too much because obviously it's your reputation on the line if it doesn't go well. So easing into a relationship I think is important too, not jumping the gun. And I know we've talked like, one client might be good for somebody, not for somebody else. And we've said all that, but just not trusting too much right off the bat, I think I would go with.
Absolutely. It's our most precious gift, and we want to be cautious with the referral and who we bring in. So I think that's a great point, is that we want to be mindful of how much we're throwing someone's way. And really we have to, we're showing our value to some of these professionals that we're working with, proving to them our value, but then hoping to see from the people that we're working with the value that they bring to the table. So excellent point, Joe, that sometimes we find our savior, right? We want them to fix all of our problems in this one area. This is our blind spot, but we can't just throw everything at them. And maybe they can handle it, but maybe it's just not appropriate to do that. So I think that's an excellent point. I know we're coming up on time. We have a few minutes left. Do we have any questions or anything that you wanted to bring up before we wrap up our lovely panel?
Well, do you want to ask anybody else where they want to ask any questions at this point? I just had one comment, but I don't want to take away from someone else's time.
Absolutely. So if anyone has a question, please feel free to enter it in the last few minutes here in the chat box. Well, don't see any coming through, but if you have any, if you want to say your comment.
Oh, was that somebody else speaking? No. Okay. I think this was a fantastic discussion. This is a type of a discussion that we have not had before for our Fiduciary September program. And I hope that each of you agree that it was valuable, and know that it will be up on our website for viewing hopefully tonight. But the one particular point, and you brought in so many points, I don't want to prioritize this one, but I really appreciated the discussion about transparency and clarity of fees. And I come at that from the perspective of spending so much time looking at research of consumers and about how their concerns with their advisors generally. And I think fee-only advisors are far better, but I think that there's a lot of RIAs who don't fully appreciate how much, and somebody said it very succinctly, clarity and honesty about fees is so much in demand. And and again, our independent RIAs are better than the rest of them as far as I can say. I think of Ameriprise, 16 pages in their ADV to explain how they get paid. You tell me what a consumer is supposed to do with that. But so anyway, I really appreciate that little piece of it as well. But I think it was just a fantastic discussion, and I hope that we can find a way to follow up on it. So thank you one and all, and a special thank you to Yesenia.
Thank you all for joining. I really hope you enjoyed this conversation. But yeah, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.